This is a square-based pyramid, like in Egypt. And then you have other structures. You see as a circle that's there. Um, and their relationship is that these structures, you can measure their internal angles. So if you get into looking at geometry, you can sum the internal angles of a triangle, and an equilateral triangle has 180 degrees. So it has three internal angles that are 60 degrees. Why is important that we measure the internal angles of these geometric structures? Is because as you sum them up, it relates to volume and magnitude and how much energy, how much magnetism that you can pack into the structure and have it be stable and have energy cycle. You think of it as like you're putting light into a container, and you have to have stable containers to have the energy cycle through. And so you can see a variety of different containers. I actually started to look at the most, and I was using a lot of the mathematics from Buckminster Fuller, who was a very famous geometrist, and he had a book, Synergetics, and I was really following a lot of his work, and he was stating that the tetrahedron with the four triangles was the most stable structure on the planet. And everything is triangles, and everything is based on tetrahedrons. And he was packaging this as the fundamental unit of how space is like compartmentalized. And so I started to look at the numbers, and I'll throw out a few of these geometric structures, but let me paint where I'm going to go with this, because it turns out to be important that we understand how the system I have right now, I'm going to call it's a whole number, because I'm going to show you using whole numbers and rational numbers. Whole numbers, I think everybody's familiar with: 1, 2, 3, 4. Rational numbers can be whole numbers, or they can also be repeating numbers, but they are not irrational numbers. They're not like pi. They're not like the golden mean ratio. Those are irrational numbers. They don't repeat. They just go on forever. Okay, but my system that I'm describing here that connects with Tesla's work uses whole numbers and rational numbers, not irrational numbers. Um, and so when I started to look at the geometry, what where this will go will be, which maybe some people don't realize, is that when the ancient Egyptians were building their structures, they were very aware of how specific geometries and angles and lengths, if you put them together in the physical 3D and you build those structures, how they're able to connect with this invisible grid between you and me, which this is the etheric lattice. They clearly knew what this was, and which is loaded with energy, and they were able to, by resonance, pull the energy from the etheric lattice to their physical structures and bring the energy there, so they would become, it would help them become very highly energetic. Okay, so imagine that you have an invisible space between me and you. There is this invisible grid that is geometric, and it's loaded with energy. But in order for you to pull the energy to you through resonance, you must match that structure. Okay, so you must be able to match it to pull the energy to you. And it would be similar to, because Tesla was all about resonance. Tesla with energy, everything he looked at was really what I would say is scalar resonance. And he wasn't using force, Newtonian force, which isn't what is commonly used in physics. So let me give you an example of the difference between the two. If I had like a glass and I wanted to break it, I could bring a sledgehammer and smash it using force. Okay, and I would break the glass. Or I could sing and match the frequency of the molecules that are making up the glass, and I could become entangled with it and we have resonance with it, And through resonance, the energy is going to build and become amplified, and the glass would shatter. I'm not even close. I don't have to get close to the glass. This is a transfer of energy through resonance. It's a communication. And this is what Tesla was using. And this is what the ancient Egyptians were doing. But they understood also the etheric lattice and the geometry and the numbers and what to do to pull the energy to that location. They left it in the hieroglyphs. I can already see it in the weighing of the heart hieroglyph, which is one of the most famous hieroglyphs that Thoth, one of the Egyptian gods, is well known, who was a teacher of liberal arts and sciences and left the information behind. It's in the hieroglyphs. But most historians will not be able to see this because they won't understand the geometry and the mathematics that I have that connects back to this etheric lattice, which is all explained in the book. Um, and so they were aware of it. Its resonance. I'll give you one other example, like soldiers walking across a bridge. If they get in the right cadence, the right rhythm, and it matches the structure of the bridge, and that you get resonance, the whole bridge will come down. You don't need to drop a bomb on it and use force. You can actually have it come down through resonance. And so that this is what Tesla was very interested in. So I was pretty certain then that because if you look at what the greatest, largest pyramid in Egypt, in Cairo, you're going to see that it's a square-based pyramid. And I was looking at a lot of Buckminster Fuller's work, and he was looking at um, what the tetrahedron, but he was looking at it with the four triangles. And really, the square-based pyramid has four triangles in a square. But you can draw a line through the square and make two other triangles. So you could say it's really six triangles because everything is really triangular. Um, and so I started to go and look at the internal summation of the angles. And so I'm going to explain like one of them. And because you can find a lot of this in the book, and the numbers, people sometimes, when I put a lot of numbers out, they go into shutdown mode because there's so many numbers. So, um, but I'm going to use the square-based pyramid as the example. So the square at the bottom, in Euclidean geometry, the internal angle of a square, if you go in, there are four of them, and they're 90 degrees. Each one is 90 degrees. And so 4 times 90 is 360 degrees. So the square base of the pyramid is 360 degrees. That's the internal summation. And then it has four triangles. In one triangle, equilateral triangle, it has 60 degrees as the internal angle, and there are three of them. So each, that's 180 degrees times four, or 720 degrees plus 360, the base, you get 1080. Okay, so the internal summation of the square-based pyramid is 1080 or 1080. Okay, so I want to look at that because I'm going to show you how I mapped it back onto that hourglass. Remember, the hourglass goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. And the 1 and the 8 are across from one another. Okay, now look at 1080. It goes 1, and then the last three digits goes 0, 8, 0. If you add those together, that's 8. The first one is by itself, so it's a 1, and the 8 would go on the bottom. Are you guys seeing what I'm saying there? So you have the 1, and then you have the 8. It's not on that. You have the 1 and the 8. And then so that corresponds to the square-based pyramid. Then if you go to the next position, there's a 2 and a 7. Because remember, it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. And the 2 and the 7 are across from one another. So if you take 1080 times 2, you'll get 2160. Okay, that's the summation of the internal angles. So then you take the first digit to 2, and then last three digits are 160. You add the 1 and the 6, and you get the 7. Okay, so the 2 and the 7, I can map the 2160 Euclidean geometric structure back onto the hourglass. I can do the same thing for the 4 and the 5. In short, that is, if you take 1080 and you multiply it by 4, you're going to get 4320, and you can put the 4 and the 5 back onto that hourglass. So in short, and I could go with the 3 and the 6. I can keep doing this with 1080 times 3, 1080 times like 5, 6, 7, and I can lay out all those geometric structures back onto that hourglass, which means that there's a connection with the harmonics and the doubling of the numbers and the geometry. Okay, are you following that? So that was the first part of, and I was really excited when I had that, because I was connecting Euclidean geometry with Nikola Tesla's, with the doubling of the numbers and the harmonics. And then I noticed something else that was really profound. I so before I go on, let me just describe a little bit, go back. So 1080 is the square base pyramid. I'm just going to throw out some of these that are known structures in the Platonic solids. So 1080 is not a Platonic solid, but it is an important geometric structure. It's more Archimedean solid because it has a square. They're not all triangles if you consider the square, even though I broke it into 2 triangles. And it has 4 other triangles. So, but it has 2160 would be the cube, or also in my system, I would say it's 2 square-based pyramids put together, and you'll form the either an octahedron or you'll form a cube. And then at 4320, the 4 and the 5 correspond to the rhombic dodecahedron, which is 12 diamonds that are put together, or almost squares that are diamond shaped. So what I'm saying is I'm getting known geometric structures that are well known throughout history, and I'm able to map them back on there. But then, as I mentioned, something else more profound happened. I noticed a whole nother set of geometry that was running in parallel to normal Euclidean geometry. So let me explain. Euclidean geometry is geometry that is static. It's not in motion. And most people do not know this. They're not aware of this. So when you're looking at the standard Platonic solids that everybody knows and they draw out, those are in a circle that's 360-degree based, and they are static. But I noticed a whole nother set of numbers that were running in parallel that were slightly shifted, phase shifted. And this was the scalar geometry that I would develop. And so, for example, I found, instead of 1080, I found the square base pyramid was 1089. Okay. And then I found that the octahedron wasn't 2160, it was 2178, and so forth. And I could go down through this list and you'll see I have this whole other parallel geometry that is phase shifted. And they're all phase shifted by the times table 9. So the difference between 1080 and 1089 is 9 degrees. The next structure, 2160 in Euclidean geometry, and scalar, it's 2178. 18-degree difference. The next one, 3240. In my system, it was 32. It's 32. The difference is 27. So 3267. It's 27. And actually, it rolls down the whole timetables, like 9, 18, 27, 36, 45. It actually explains where the 9 timetables is coming from. It's the difference between what I'm calling scalar geometry and Euclidean. My geometry that I have is actually geometry in motion, geometry that breathes. Okay, and they're different. And the geometry I have connects back to Nikola Tesla's atheric lattice beautifully. Like it matches perfectly. So I noticed these numbers. So how did I notice these numbers? Like, because I saw the other numbers, and they were the scalar geometry, but the way that I found them it was not probably what you would think. I discovered these numbers, I was first led by an individual called, his name is Jason Brashears, and he's got a platform called Archaics. And he was doing this little thing about Tesla, and he found this number 2178, which is, it is in the geometry that I have, and this number is incredibly important. But he didn't do much with it. He found it as a number, and I need to talk a little bit about numbers in mere subtraction and what this means, because this opened a whole order of things for me. So I'm going to talk, mere subtraction is a way where you can take numbers, and I'm going to give you an example. You can take a number, like you can say 720, and then you can subtract it from its mirror. So 720, if you minus its mirror, it would be 027 or 27. And then you're going to get a number. And then you can take that number and subtract it from its mirror. And most of the numbers that you try this for will collapse to zero. Okay, if you keep repeating this process. And what that means is the structure is not stable, and it will collapse back into the primordial waters. All potential is everything. Is certain groups describe this differently, but the ancient Egyptians said that all potential, they described it as the primordial waters. The energy is collapsing back and going back to the original source. So if you can sit down and try it. It's very interesting to sit down and put a number down and subtract it by its mirror or its reflection, get that number, take that number, and just keep repeating this process. If it collapses to zero, which most numbers do, it's not a stable structure. But I found numbers that don't collapse to zero, but they go in this loop, okay? So 2178 is one of these numbers. And I'll give you an example so you could actually see how this will happen. I'll give you the number 2475. If you minus it by its mirror, so it's 2475 would be 57. Okay, so 2475, running it backwards, 5742. Okay, if you do that, you're going to get a number that's 3267. If you then minus it by its mirror, you're going to ultimately end up with a number that's 2178. And that number will just, if you take it, it's just going to keep going in a loop. Now, why is that important? Because nature does everything by cycles, energy cycles. It doesn't collapse to the zero. Well, you know what 2178 is? It turns out that that is the equivalent of the octahedron, but it's the one that shifted. And you'll also find, I found a whole series of numbers that do this. 1089, 2178, 326, they're all 1089 multiples. And I found, when I first started this, I found 9 numbers. These numbers are incredible because 1089 is one, 2178, 3267, and then I found 45, 34, and then 5445, and then 6534, and all the way, they're all 1089 multiples. But I'm going to show you why these are incredible, because in this series 1089 is there, and 9801 is also its mirror, and they will not, these numbers will just keep cycling. Okay, and then another one was, I mentioned 2178, and its mirror 8712 were there. So actually I found 4 pairs of mirrors within these numbers, and then at the center was the actual singularity at 5445. It didn't have a pair because there are 9 numbers and there are 4 pairs. So for example, 1089 and 9801 are a pair. 2178 and 8712 are a second pair. So you guys following these? There were 4 of these pairs in one singularity. These were geometric structures that you can map back to the Platonic solids, but they're all the ones that are phase shift and they do not collapse. So what you're looking at here is a set of geometric structures that are based upon the square-based pyramid in Egypt, that the energy, once you put it into these structures, will continually cycle. and it doesn't leak. These are stable containers. 2178 is the light body. It's what holds the energy. The light will circulate in that. It's an octahedral 12-pointed structure that's very, very important. And I noticed that even amongst those 1089 multiple numbers, they actually will collapse to it's like an attractor. They go to 2178 because it's incredibly important numerically speaking. So um, those numbers, the geometry, then this led me then to trying to understand and make it connected with Nikola Tesla's etheric lattice. So I started to dig deeper, and then things started to show up because I noticed that 33 times 33 is 1089. Okay, so 1089 is the very first structure. That's the square-based pyramid that is shifted from Euclidean geometry by 9 degrees. It's actually breeze. And that one is, why is that one significant? Because it's the fundamental, what I would say is the fundamental frequency or the first harmonic of the whole system. You see it in Leonardo da Vinci's painting. I'm going to take you through history. Watch this. If you go and you look at that painting, and we flew to Milan, Daniela and I flew to Milan in Italy to look at this. And a lot of people have seen it. So Christ is at the center of this painting. Okay, he's the 1089. And then to the left, there are 6 disciples on the left and right, and they're in 2 groups of 3. So you see 33 and 33, or 33 times 33 is an encryption for 1089, the fundamental frequency of the very first harmonic. It's a geometric structure at the base level. And so that's an encryption that was left behind, which is really fascinating. And so I then was very interested in trying to decipher, like, with Tesla's 369, it's connected to the etheric lattice. And I'll talk a little bit about this etheric lattice because Tesla was a big supporter of the etheric lattice. In traditional physics, when they hear this word ether, they cringe. And they have been either told through their education that the ether doesn't exist. And mainstream physics, if you talk to most of the physicists, they'll say the ether doesn't exist. They kind of got rid of the ether, and then they had to develop quantum mechanics to bring the ether back. And quantum mechanics is so complicated, most people don't even understand it. And that's a red flag for nature's not that complicated. Even Einstein was using terminology like the fabric of space-time. This is all the ether. And it stems from a misconception of one experiment, I think, that was done by Michelson and Morley. And they did an experiment, and they were trying to figure out whether the ether was real. And in their experiment, they suggested that the ether would be, in their hypothesis, a static ether, and they disproved the static ether. But the ether Tesla was talking about actually breathes and it's in motion. And so most of the physicists look at that and they throw away that the ether, they just assume it's static, but it's not. It's actually alive and it actually breathes. And so the ether, in my opinion, is alive. It's how nature and the universe works. It's how it breathes. The geometry breathes. And if you have the right geometry and then you can connect to the etheric lattice and you can pull energy to you. So there's a lot of applications here.